As Europe braces for a difficult winter with Russian attacks intensifying on Ukrainian energy infrastructure and Donald Trump preparing to re-enter the White House with promises of rapid peace talks, French President Emmanuel Macron arrived in Beijing for his fourth official visit to China. What unfolded over 3 days was less a breakthrough and more a carefully choreographed display of persistent differences, veiled warnings, and selective areas of cooperation. The visit began on a crisp Thursday morning at the Great Hall of the People. President Xi Jinping personally greeted Macron with full military honors. A 21-gun salute, an honor guard in dress uniforms, and the obligatory red carpet rolled out across Tiananmen Square. For China, the pageantry signaled that France remained a privileged European partner, one Beijing still hopes to peel away from the broader Western bloc. For Macron, weakened by months of domestic political turmoil and a fragile economy, the trip was an attempt to extract concessions on Ukraine while protecting French agricultural exports from looming Chinese retaliatory tariffs. The central issue on the French side was unmistakable urgency. With the Russia-Ukraine war approaching its fourth year, 1,379 days as of December 2025, Russian forces have destroyed or damaged roughly 50% of Ukraine's power generation capacity, according to the Ukrainian Energy Ministry. The International Energy Agency warns that without a winter ceasefire on critical infrastructure, up to 11 million Ukrainians could face prolonged blackouts in sub-zero temperatures. European leaders fear that any Trump-brokered settlement could freeze the front lines and effectively reward Russian territorial gains. Only days earlier, Macron had hosted President Volodymyr Zelensky in Paris, publicly reaffirming that Europe would never accept a peace imposed on Kyiv and that only Ukraine could decide on territorial concessions. Macron therefore pressed Xi at length to use Beijing's considerable leverage over Moscow, still Russia's largest economic partner and de facto diplomatic shield at the United Nations. China remains Russia's top trading partner. Bilateral trade reached $240 billion in 2024, up 26% from pre-war levels. Beijing has supplied dual-use components, microelectronics, and machine tools that have helped sustain Russian military production despite Western sanctions. In return, Russia has become China's largest supplier of discounted oil, with deliveries hitting a record 2.2 million barrels per day in 2024. Yet Xi did not indicate shifting course. In his public remarks after the closed-door talks, the Chinese leader reiterated that Beijing would continue to play what he called a constructive role in seeking a political settlement, while firmly rejecting any attempts to shift blame onto third parties or engage in smears. Translated, this was a polite but unmistakable refusal to join Western pressure on Moscow. Chinese officials have consistently framed the conflict as a European security crisis provoked by NATO expansion, not an unprovoked Russian invasion. China's actual efforts to stop the war have been limited and self-serving. Beijing has floated two vague peace initiatives: a 12-point position paper released in February 2023 on the first anniversary of the invasion, and a 6-point joint statement with Brazil in May 2024. Neither document mentions Russian withdrawal, war crimes, or Ukrainian territorial integrity. Instead, they emphasize an immediate ceasefire, which would freeze Russian control over roughly 19% of Ukraine, respect for the legitimate security concerns of all parties, and opposition to nuclear escalation. Kyiv and its Western partners dismissed both proposals as favoring Moscow. Since then, Chinese Special Representative Li Hui has undertaken several rounds of shuttle diplomacy across European capitals and Moscow, but no concrete mediation track has emerged. Western intelligence assesses that Beijing's priority is to prevent a total Russian battlefield collapse that could destabilize Vladimir Putin and weaken a key anti-Western partner, not to force Moscow into concessions. On the economic front, the atmosphere was marginally warmer. Both sides signed cooperation agreements in civil nuclear energy, agriculture and food safety, education, and environmental protection. Xi expressed willingness to import more high-quality French agricultural products, a signal welcomed in Paris, given that China had threatened retaliatory tariffs on French pork, dairy and brandy in response to EU anti-subsidy duties on Chinese electric vehicles. France exports roughly 1.8 billion euros worth of pork and 1.2 billion euros in dairy to China annually. Any tariffs would devastate rural constituencies already angry with Macron's government. A lighter but symbolically important moment came when Xi announced a new round of cooperation on giant panda conservation. The two pandas on loan to Beauval Zoo in France, Yuanmeng and Huanlili, were returned to China earlier in 2025 upon the expiration of the 10-year agreement. The new deal suggests that France will soon receive another pair, a classic tool of Chinese panda diplomacy reserved for countries Beijing considers friendly or strategically useful. Taiwan, however, cast a long shadow. Only days before Macron's arrival, Japan's newly elected Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba stated in an interview that a Chinese attack on Taiwan would represent an existential threat to Japan, and that Tokyo would consider all options, including direct military involvement. Beijing reacted with fury, summoning the Japanese ambassador and launching a diplomatic campaign to isolate Tokyo. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi used a dinner with his French counterpart Jean-Noël Barrot to warn about the serious harm caused by Japan's position and expressed hope that France would continue to understand and support China's stance. The official French readout of the dinner omitted any mention of Taiwan or Japan, referring only vaguely to international crises. Neither leader raised the issue publicly during the Beijing press appearances, but Xi repeatedly urged France to preserve strategic autonomy and make independent decisions amid global volatility, code for resisting US-led containment. This push for European strategic autonomy has been a cornerstone of Chinese diplomacy toward France since de Gaulle established diplomatic relations in 1964. Xi invoked that history, noting that previous generations had broken through Cold War shadows to forge ties. Today, Beijing hopes Macron's oft-repeated desire for Europe to avoid becoming a vassal of Washington will translate into softer French positions on Taiwan, technology restrictions, and de-risking from China. Macron, for his part, acknowledged the gravity of global imbalances that could drive France and China onto separate paths, but he stopped short of any concessions on core European security interests. Analysts in Paris described the visit as a holding operation, no breakthroughs, no public ruptures, and just enough economic sweeteners to prevent immediate trade escalation. In the end, Macron returned to a France still reeling from months of political instability and facing a harsh winter of energy insecurity in Europe. Xi reaffirmed China's refusal to join the West in isolating Russia while extending just enough economic olive branches, pandas, nuclear deals, and agricultural market access to keep Paris engaged rather than alienated. The Beijing meeting thus encapsulated the current state of China's approach to the Ukraine war, rhetorically neutral, practically pro-Russian, and opportunistically courting European leaders, wary of full alignment with Washington. As Trump's inauguration approaches and battlefield dynamics remain deadlocked, Beijing appears content to wait, preserve its strategic partnership with Moscow, and let others bear the costs of prolonged conflict. For now, the red carpet has been rolled up, the honor guard dismissed, and the pandas are on their way. But the deeper strategic divergences between Paris and Beijing remain as wide as ever.